The night our quiet neighborhood turned into a stage for chaos didn't begin with shouting, threats, or sirens. It began with a single knock, sharp, impatient, almost trembling with authority. I remember pausing halfway down the hallway, glancing at my wife as the echo faded into the stillness of our home. We weren't expecting anyone. We certainly weren't expecting the police. And we definitely weren't expecting a $3,900 HOA fine to be the reason someone was standing on our porch with flashing lights washing across the driveway. My wife opened the door first. She always met tension with calm, and that night was no different. The officer stood tall, rigid, holding a clipboard like it was some form of shield. Behind him, his patrol car cast blue and red streaks across the neighborhood, colors that made the whole scene feel unreal, like we had stepped into someone else's story. And yet, every part of it was about us. And the HOA Karen who lived 3 houses down. She had called the cops again. And according to the officer, this time it was serious. A $3,900 violation. A demand. An accusation that we had ignored multiple official notices from the HOA. Notices we had never actually seen. I remember the officer's tone. Firm but uneasy, like even he wasn't convinced by the words he'd been given. But he had a job to do, and we were the ones standing in front of him. My wife listened quietly, her hands subtly brushing mine as the officer continued listing supposed infractions. Yard measurements, paint shade discrepancies, and a landscaping violation that sounded more like a fairy tale written by someone who had too much time on their hands. The more he talked, the more absurd the situation felt. Yet the tension, the embarrassment, the frustration, it all hit at once. Being treated like criminals over something we didn't even know existed. Behind the officer, I could see her. Hoa Karen. Peeking from behind her living room blinds, acting like the queen of surveillance, convinced she had finally caught us in some grand scandal. For her, this was victory. For us, it was a humiliation we hadn't earned. But my wife, calm, steady, patient, did something I didn't expect. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. A heavy one, thick paper, gold embossing, the kind people instantly recognize but never want to deal with. She held it gently, like it contained the final piece of a puzzle we didn't ask for, but were now forced to complete. The officer glanced at it, then at her. His confident posture shifted. His breath caught. The color drained from his face as he read the embossed judge's seal across the front. And in that moment, right there on our porch, the entire energy changed. He opened his mouth to speak, but before a single word could come out, another shadow appeared at the end of the driveway. Someone we hadn't seen. Someone who shouldn't have been there. And that's where everything truly began. The figure at the end of the driveway stopped just outside the glow of the patrol car lights, standing perfectly still, watching us. The officer noticed him too. His hand shifted closer to his belt, not fully defensive, but suddenly aware. My wife tightened her grip on the envelope, and for a moment, none of us spoke. The air felt strangely heavier, as if whatever was about to happen had been waiting in the dark for the right moment to step forward. But before we could make sense of that shadow, the officer cleared his throat and looked back at the judge's seal. I could tell he recognized the authority behind it. He wasn't just reacting to a piece of paper. He was reacting to the weight of something that had clearly complicated the HOA's story long before tonight, which is where the real problem began. The truth is, our conflict with the HOA didn't start with a $3,900 fine. It started months earlier, quietly, almost politely, with a letter slipped under our door. A friendly reminder. They called it. About a minor repair on our side fence. Nothing urgent. Nothing dramatic. Just a note. But even then, something felt off. The letter wasn't typed like the others. The signature was smudged. And the date at the top was 2 weeks older than the day we received it. My wife noticed it first. She was always more observant than me, always reading between lines other people forgot existed. She said it wasn't a reminder, it was bait. And she was right, because that letter was followed by 2 more, each more demanding, each more aggressive, each blaming us for things that weren't even ours to fix. When we asked for a meeting with the HOA board, They postponed it 3 times. When we emailed for clarification, they responded with scripted messages that never addressed our questions. It was like dealing with ghosts, voices that existed, but no one you could actually face. Except for one person, Karen. She always found a way to stand a little too close, to comment a little too loudly, to pretend she cared about the community, while keeping mental notes on every detail of our home. She had this way of smiling while measuring the height of our hedges with her eyes. A way of pretending her clipboard was just an accessory instead of her favorite weapon. But what she didn't know, what no one in the HOA knew, was that my wife had already taken the issue to someone outside the neighborhood. Someone who actually held power. Someone who had given her that sealed envelope because the HOA's behavior wasn't just petty. It was illegal. And now that envelope was in the hands of a police officer who suddenly understood he'd walked into something he wasn't prepared for. But before he could say a word, the shadow at the end of the driveway finally stepped into the light. And everything we thought we understood about this conflict shifted again. The man who stepped into the light wasn't someone we recognized, at least not at first. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket, with the kind of tired eyes that suggested he'd been watching our house long before tonight. His gaze flicked from the officer to my wife, then finally landed on the envelope in her hand. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to the 3 of them, and the tension between their silent stares. The officer's entire posture shifted as he recognized the man. Not in a friendly way. More like he'd just seen the last person he wanted to deal with tonight. "Sir, this is a private matter," the officer muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The man didn't respond. He just kept walking closer, slow and deliberate, like he was stepping into a story he wasn't sure he wanted to be part of. And the closer he got, the more I began to sense something deeper, something personal beneath his silence. My wife moved slightly in front of me, her calmness still intact, but I could feel the tension in her hand. She wasn't intimidated, but she wasn't comfortable either. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. This felt like part of something bigger, something she hadn't told me. And for the first time since the night began, a quiet doubt edged into my thoughts. What exactly was in that envelope? And why did this stranger care? Before I could ask, the stranger spoke in a low voice, steady yet worn. "You shouldn't have ignored the first warnings." He wasn't talking to the officer. He was talking to my wife. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they accused us, but because she didn't look surprised. She just stared back at him with this calm intensity that almost looked familiar. That's when I realized. She knew him. Not well. Not fondly. But enough. And she hadn't told me. A small part of me felt something sharp twist in my chest. Betrayal, confusion, or maybe fear. But I pushed it down. This wasn't the time. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen's blinds twitched. She was watching everything unfold like a soap opera she had scripted herself. She wanted her victory. She wanted trouble. She wanted us humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. But she wasn't prepared for this stranger. And from the look on her face, he wasn't part of her plan. The officer took a step back, suddenly looking like the least powerful person in the scene. His earlier confidence had drained away, replaced with nerves he couldn't quite mask. "Ma'am," he said, gesturing toward the envelope, "if you could just explain what this is." But before my wife could speak, the stranger cut in again. "That seal doesn't protect you anymore." The sentence froze all of us. Even my wife, whose calm cracked for just a split second. Something had shifted. Something none of us saw coming. And whatever it was only beginning. The moment he said those words, the whole world seemed to stop. Even the breeze went still, as if the night itself was holding its breath. My wife didn't move, didn't speak. She only stared at him. Eyes steady, jaw tight, fingers tightening around the envelope as though letting go would break something we couldn't fix. The officer glanced between them, confused but cautious. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back." "No," the stranger said quietly. "Not tonight." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Enough to make the officer pause. Enough to make my stomach twist. My wife finally spoke, her voice soft but sharp. You don't get to talk about the seal. Not after what you did. What he did. The words cut through the night like a blade. I stepped closer to her. You know him, I whispered. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it. She only kept her eyes on him, like she was staring at a problem she thought she'd already left behind. The stranger smirked, but there was no humor in it. Only bitterness. You should have come to the hearing. Things would have gone differently. Hearing. My mind raced. She had mentioned meetings, calls, letters, but never this. Never anything involving a hearing. Never anything involving him. Across the street, Karen's blinds shot open wider. She was fully invested now, her silhouette glued to the window. She didn't understand what was unfolding. She just sensed drama and wanted to feed on it. The officer tried again, his voice tighter now. What exactly is going on here? Neither answered him. Instead, the stranger stepped even closer. Close enough that I could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the weight of something old pressing against him. Close enough that I finally understood. This wasn't about a fine. This wasn't about Karen. This wasn't even about the HOA. This was personal. My wife took a breath. A slow, shaky one she tried to hide. Leave, she whispered. You're not part of this anymore. He laughed under his breath. A hollow, sharp sound. Oh, I'm very much part of it. Especially after the board found out what you submitted. The officer stiffened. I felt my pulse slam in my ears. My wife didn't move. What did she submit? The officer asked. The stranger's eyes flicked to him. To someone higher than the HOA. Higher than all of you. Then he looked back at my wife. And you didn't think they'd send someone to deal with the fallout? The officer went pale again. My wife's silence deepened. My chest tightened. Fallout from what? What had she given a judge? And why was this man acting like she'd triggered something she couldn't control? Before I could ask, headlights turned onto our street. Slow, steady, unfamiliar. Another car. Another visitor. The stranger's expression shifted, just slightly. Enough to tell me he knew exactly who was inside that vehicle. He stepped back, eyes narrowing. It's too late now, he muttered. And as the car rolled to a stop in front of our driveway, my wife whispered something I'd never heard from her before. Fear. They weren't supposed to come tonight. The unfamiliar car rolled to a slow, deliberate stop, its engine humming low, steady, almost too calm for the tension suffocating the street. The door opened, and the first footstep onto the pavement felt louder than it should have, echoing through the hush that had taken over everything. A woman stepped out. Not HOA. Not police. Not a neighbor. Someone official. Not in uniform but in authority. Her presence alone shifted the air. Even the stranger stiffened, and for the first time since he appeared, uncertainty flickered across his face. My wife's fingers trembled around the envelope. It was small, barely noticeable, but real. Very real. The officer straightened, like instinct was telling him to show respect even if he didn't understand why. The woman approached quietly, her eyes scanning the scene. First the patrol car, then the officer, then my wife, then the stranger, and finally, the watching blinds of HOA Karen. It escalated faster than expected, she said, her tone calm but cutting. My wife swallowed hard. I told you they were pushing it. You told me, the woman replied. But you didn't tell him. Her eyes shifted to me. Serious. Apologetic. Heavy with something I wasn't prepared to carry. A cold rush went through me. What didn't she tell me? I asked. My wife closed her eyes for a second. Just one brief, painful second before she faced me. The HOA investigation wasn't just about the fines, she said quietly. It wasn't about the fence, or the paint color, or anything they claimed. She looked at the stranger. It was about him, and the board he's connected to. My heart dropped. The stranger let out a frustrated breath. You weren't supposed to involve outsiders. And you weren't supposed to forge signatures. She shot back. Forge signatures. The officer's head snapped toward him. Even Karen, still pressed against her window, froze. The woman stepped closer to us, lowering her voice but not softening it. "The documents your wife submitted," she said, "weren't just evidence of HOA misconduct. They exposed something larger. An entire chain of fraudulent fines across multiple neighborhoods." The world tilted. "What?" I whispered. My wife nodded slowly. "They weren't just targeting us. They've been targeting homeowners across the county." The stranger's jaw clenched. "You should have come to me privately. You manipulated people," she said sharply. "You ruined lives. And you made it worse by going over my head." That's when the second twist hit. Harder, deeper, completely unexpected. The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a second sealed envelope. One with a different crest. Not a judge's. A state investigator's. She handed it to the officer. "I need you to understand," she said. "This isn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. This is a criminal inquiry." The street fell silent. Then she turned to my wife, her voice dropping to a solemn whisper. "And the board knows who exposed them. They know her name. They know your address." A chill crawled up my spine. "And," she added, looking toward the stranger, "they didn't send him to intimidate you." The stranger's expression broke. Guilt, fear, something darker. "They sent me," he said quietly, "to protect you." The words hung there, impossible to ignore. Protect us from our own HOA. And suddenly, everything we thought we knew snapped out of place. The moment those words left his mouth. Asterisk to protect you asterisk. The entire story flipped upside down. Everything that had felt threatening, confusing, suspicious, suddenly became something else. Not safer, not clearer, just heavier. The kind of truth that doesn't settle, it sinks. The officer held the state investigator's envelope like it was a live wire. He stepped back, almost instinctively creating space between all of us, as though the ground itself had become unstable. My wife finally spoke, voice low but steady. "Protect us from what?" The stranger hesitated, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not of us, not of the police, but of whoever was behind everything. "The board didn't just forge signatures," he said. "They laundered fines, created fake compliance fees, used HOA violations as a way to funnel money through shell accounts. When you submitted your evidence, it exposed everything." The officer's face drained. "This is organized fraud." The investigator nodded. "And they don't care who they silence to protect it." Across the street, Karen's blinds snapped shut so fast it sounded like a gunshot. Not because she was innocent, far from it, but because she suddenly understood she wasn't part of the controlling group she thought she belonged to. She had been a pawn. A loud one, but a pawn nonetheless. The stranger stepped forward, lowering his voice. "They sent someone tonight. Someone higher than the board. Someone who doesn't care about rules or laws." My wife looked toward the quiet street behind him, the shadows stretching long and still. "Who?" I asked. The investigator answered for him. "The one who signed the $3,900 fine." My chest tightened. "But that signature was fake." "Yes," the investigator said. "But the name wasn't." A second set of headlights turned onto the street. This time fast. Too fast. The officer reached for his radio. "We need backup." "No," the investigator snapped. "They'll stop the line before it reaches us. We move now." The stranger looked at me, then at my wife. "You're coming with us. Both of you." But my wife suddenly stepped back. "No," the investigator froze. The stranger's jaw clenched. Even I couldn't breathe. "What do you mean, no?" I whispered. She turned not to me, but to the officer. "Give me the envelope. The state envelope. The one meant for law enforcement only." The officer blinked. "Ma'am, this is restricted." "Give it to me," she said quietly, "or we all lose." There was something in her tone, an authority I hadn't heard before, a certainty that wasn't reckless, but earned. Slowly, reluctantly, the officer handed it over. She tore it open, pulled out a single sheet, held it up to the headlights of the approaching car. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't a warrant. It was a notice of suspension. suspension of the entire HOA, effective immediately, signed by the same judge whose seal she carried. The investigator's eyes widened. You got the emergency suspension approved already? My wife nodded. I filed for it the day they threatened us. The stranger exhaled, relief washing over him. With this, the board loses authority. All enforcement stops. The car screeched to a halt at the end of the driveway. The driver stepped out, someone with power in their walk, fury in their expression. But when they saw my wife holding up the suspension order, they stopped mid-step, frozen, defeated, silent. The investigator stepped forward, calm but firm. It's over. And just like that, the threat that had been building for months cracked open and dissolved. But as the driver turned to leave, they muttered something under their breath, soft, but sharp enough for us to hear. This wasn't just about the board. You exposed someone bigger, and they won't forget. A chill ran through me. The danger was over, but something deeper had just begun. When the final car disappeared down the street and the flashing anxiety of the night faded into quiet, it felt like the first real breath we'd taken in months. The investigator made a few final notes. The officer radioed for a follow-up team, and the stranger, still shaken but no longer guarded, stood with his hands buried in his pockets, staring at the ground like he was trying to remember who he used to be before all of this. Karen's house stayed dark. Her blinds never opened again. The silence from her window was its own confession. For the first time, our driveway wasn't a battleground. It was just ours. The investigator approached us last, her posture softer now. You two should rest, she said. The suspension means everything stops. All fines, all enforcement, every bit of control they thought they had. It's all gone. My wife nodded, relief and exhaustion mixing like two sides of the same breath. And the bigger group? The ones he warned about. They'll be handled, the investigator said, though her tone carried a quiet honesty. It may take time, but you've done more than enough. The stranger finally lifted his eyes. I'm sorry, he said, not as an excuse, but as something he truly needed to say. I didn't know everything the board was doing. I thought I could fix it from the inside. My wife looked at him for a long moment before answering. You protected us tonight. That matters. He swallowed hard, nodded once, and walked into the darkness, disappearing as quietly as he had appeared. When we finally stepped inside our home, the place felt different. Not safer exactly, but lighter. Like the storm clouds that had hung over us for so long had finally begun to break. We sat on the couch, the state suspension still in my wife's hands. You should have told me everything, I whispered gently. She rested her head on my shoulder. I know. I was trying to protect you. I didn't want this to become our whole life. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling her finally unclench. We faced things together, even the scary parts. For the first time in a long time, she smiled. Over the next days, the investigation spread. Neighbors who'd been quietly suffering started coming forward with their own stories. Unfair fines, manipulated rules, pressure they'd been too afraid to question. The truth rippled outward, and with it, something even more powerful: solidarity. The HOA, once the loudest voice in the neighborhood, faded into paperwork and silence. And the people, real people, finally stepped back into the center of their own lives. As for us, we learned something that night, something simple, but unforgettable. Power doesn't come from titles or threats or fines. It comes from standing your ground even when you're standing in the dark. And sometimes the smallest envelope can change everything. So if you're listening to this story right now, if you've ever felt pushed, silenced, or cornered by someone who thinks they hold all the control, remember this: the moment you stop being afraid of them is the moment they lose their power. If this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps more people hear stories that matter.